Hi, everybody. Good to see you. And good to see that you're still here. Okay, although you've had these sessions before lunch. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I know what these guys goes for, and I know what they are doing on a daily basis. So that's the things they are doing out there. So we will try to cope with that. We will try to present some ideas and some thoughts about what can we do to put some more obstacles into their ways. A lot of the things we're going to talk about are basically putting obstacles and making it more difficult. Maybe sometimes we can make it impossible. But I cannot promise or guarantee that part. But I can definitely say we can make it very much more difficult. So they will get more noisy, they will get more revealing themselves and revealing their activities when it comes to what they are doing in our environments. As said, my name is Hassan Shkarti. With me, I have
Daniel Ulrichs.
Yeah, Daniel he's very much into Active Directory, much more than I am ever going to be, I guess. So if you're interested in the bits and bytes, if you want to throw any questions at him after the session, I guess he will be the right speaking partner for you. So let's go ahead. So as said, what we're speaking about is this critical period of time. I guess many of you have seen this type of graph before. This is a classic attack timeline. Has been represented by many professionals in the area. So it says there is some preparation time these guys are doing. The actual first foothold, you saw an example or a couple of examples of that, attacking a service, attacking a client machine, etc. From that to you have what we call in the business domain dominance, or control over the domain, or control over the major platform that controls everything else, is not much more than 48 hours, 24 to 40 hours, something like that. I guess the guys has demonstrated that. Yeah, very well, a couple of times. So that's the thing we need to deal with. That's how easy it is for an attacker to get hold and control of the environment if it is possible. So this is not necessarily true for everybody, everything, all environments out there. If it is possible, which we believe it is possible in many environments, way too many. If I would like to express myself a little bit more clear, then that's the case. Okay. We will speak about detection, and we'll speak about what's going on after that. Those 150 days plus, that's a different story. When we get to having that much information, so we can start detecting that one. But let's focus on that part. The getting control or gaining control over the domain and domain-specific parameters. And the whole thing starts from having a credential, having access to Active Directory. I mean, in most of the cases, it is Active Directory, more or less. If you guys, any of you guys happen to have another system, something else that is not utilizing Active Directory, we can probably have a similar discussion about that. But let's take a little bit of the broad masses out there that actually utilizing Active Directory to control identities within enterprises. So, as said, what we aim at is not necessarily making this 100%. There is no silver bullet. There is no, such proof that, hey, the attacker won't ever be able to do anything. As far as there are people involved and they can do things in your environment, we call them admins. Okay, an attacker would be able to do the same thing if they know how to approach these guys, if they know how to approach these machines, if they know how to approach these systems, and conduct the same type of schematics and the same type of procedures and calls you're conducting in your day-by-day operations. So putting obstacles in their way, disturbing the attackers' playground, tools, processes, routines, that's something we can work with. Maybe to the degree of 100%, so we know that on this part they will not be able to perform anything at all, but there will always be something they can do. So that's the thing we're going to go about. So we have some pillars in here, obviously, credential hygiene. This is the big part we're going to focus on in this session. And related to that, there is a least privilege model. Many of you guys have heard this before. I guess I'm not the first one telling you about the least privileges and the necessity of credential hygiene. And of course, network segmentation, target monitoring, etc. So we will touch bases with the other parts and actually the session after this. So there will be a continuous red thread going on there. So let's go ahead with the things related to credentials and credential hygiene. And of course, we start with, although we're speaking about Active Directory, we're speaking about that type of structures, we still rely on and have the need to have local identities in our systems. Whether we like it or not, local identities are there. I guess they are there to stay. There is actually a kind of a revival going on with local identities. I mean, back in the days, most of you guys heard that, hey, you should get rid of that local admin account, right? So disable it, set a random password on it, just forget it, delete the account if possible, all of that. And I guess many of you have actually done that. Okay, if you start asking Microsoft and other vendors about, hey, how should we do about those local admin accounts? They are used by hackers to do things on our systems. Okay, if you had that problem, obviously you didn't listen to the first part. So one major problem we do have in our platforms is the lateral movement because of local accounts, because of the reuse of passwords for those local accounts, right? So I have a bunch of clients having the same local accounts with the same password. Obviously, an attacker getting hold of one machine, extracting those credentials, can jump to the next and the next and the next, and then conduct a successful lateral movement. So we're going back to this and says, hey, if you still need those local accounts for any reason, security actually is one reason. Because at the local account, or using the local account, you will restrict the attacker to have local privileges only on that machine. Now, that's true only if that account is useful on that machine. So no relationship to any other machine, any shared passwords, anything of that at all. That's the basic requirements. If you want to go with the local admin account, that's perfect. But make sure the password is unique for that machine. It's not possible to use on any other guy anywhere else on the platform. So if that's the case, then it's actually a security enhancement in your environment. If that's not the case, then that's the biggest no-no you ever have to deal with in your environment. So having the local account can be both. It could be a very nice, very useful feature, security-wise, and it could be the thing that just killed your environment, because you just enabled somebody to conduct lateral movement amongst your servers and workstations. The Microsoft way of doing this today, when you ask Microsoft, well, how should we do about this? They say, OK, we offer you a tool. It's a local admin password solution system. So using that tool, you can automatically set unique passwords, randomized passwords if you would like to, changing frequently with a set interval, a policy, etc. And you have all means of retrieving those passwords at the time when you need to manage those machines. So no lateral movement. We still have the power to use those local admin accounts. We can give away those passwords to the users. We know the password is going to change within 24 seconds, 24 minutes, 24 hours, 24 months, I don't know. You set the interval. And if you want to change the password immediately, you can flag that in the system. So this is an add-on.
Yeah. Can you show that?
Let me see, yeah. So this is a group policy extension, so an add-on on our clients and servers. You just install that group policy extension, and there is a corresponding group policy to be configured.
Yeah, and we also extend the schema with 2 new attributes for the computer account. The one admin password, where the password is stored in clear text and is marked as confidential for extra security, so not everybody can read it. And then we have the password expire time, the timestamp of how old the password is. And here is a little tweak I do sometimes, is that I change the search flags and also set this as confidential. So default, everyone can read the timestamps and see, have this computer used labs? Has it updated it? How old is the password? So on. So I also set this as confidential. For a delegated admin, he can search for the computers and those two attributes and see the timestamp and the password. If we jump to a regular user who do the same search, the box will be empty. Maybe looks like, hey, they don't use it yet, or at least not those computers.
So a whole lot about this is trying to disturb the attackers' activities. Like they will go about enumerating all sorts of things in your Active Directory, trying to figure out what's going on here. Who are the important guys? What's going on? What's happening with the passwords on these local computers? How often do they change, etc. So that runbook has to be performed. By doing these things, we effectively disturb that runbook. We're not giving them the facts about how we manage different things in our system, starting with the local admin accounts. As I said, that's one of the security features being offered today to start using or reusing or going back to the local admin accounts because you have a disconnect. This is only valid locally on the machine. If anybody gaining control or having control over that machine, they already got that. I'm not giving away anything more valuable than that. This is like going back and mimicking a little bit of the behavior of Linux, Unix-based systems that are not interconnected with a directory service. There is only a local root account with hopefully a unique password. If you get control over that machine, that's where you are, and you cannot get anywhere else from there. So that's the local password solution for local admin accounts. It manages one single account, not necessarily the built-in. You decide which one to manage. Of course, we need to make sure to clean up those local admin groups in our machines. We can do that by monitoring. We can do that by policies. For instance, the restricted group policy in terms of cleanups, so periodical cleanup of those local groups. And of course, monitoring changes. That will be something on our agenda to perform. Besides that, we need to start thinking of what type of access we should allow with what type of accounts in terms of management or privilege access to our machines. So this is another classic, very old recommendation that's been around for a good while, at least ever since Microsoft started doing that more actively the last 5 to 6 years. Start working or playing with those deny user rights assignments policies. There are 5 deny policies to work with. So deny access this computer from network, deny logon as service, bad job, act as part of operating system, and remote desktop, right? Just five deny policies, which are overruling all the allow policies. There are plenty more allow policies in the system. So working actively with the deny, why should a domain admin be able to log on to every single workstation in our environments? Because nobody said it shouldn't. The default setting allows for that. Can we override it? Yes. Allow access to this computer from network, allow logon locally, allow running the remote desktop services. Domain admin should go there. All privilege accounts should go there, or all our privilege groups should be there, except for those machines that are intended for the use of those admins. And that should be a fairly easy thing to establish. I think it should be quite easy just to say, hey, you manage Active Directory, but you're not allowed to do it from anywhere else except for that particular machine. This one we configured for that purpose. If that's an inconvenience, you have to live with it, or just look for some other task to perform. Because if you're not performing it that way, we are opening up for an exposure. We are opening up for an attacker who can control another machine, and you just happen to use that hacked machine, and then you're giving away the domain credentials, the domain admin credentials. So that's something we need to work at. So the basic user assignments or user rights assignments, these are local policies. You can override these policies if you're managing the machine, if you have admin privs. Of course, but if every machine is configured likewise, it doesn't matter if you disable that on your own machine, the other machines will not listen. So that's the type of effect we want to accomplish. We're going to touch bases with some other concepts that works with creating virtual accounts, like the PowerShell remoting. We're going to go back to the PowerShell remoting and look at that into details, definitely during the next session. So there is a concept of running virtual accounts at some events in the operating system, which is very interesting model of substituting admin access with regular user access, creating necessary virtual accounts with admin privs as we go. So that's something to be looked at separately. If we continue the story about the local accounts, right, this is one of the biggest things. I mean, the guys attacking the system, hacking the systems, they figure, oh, there is a service, this is a backup agent, or this is this and that, and they are running with domain credentials. And quite often, these are very high credentials in the domain. So the story here continues and says, hey, please set up a rule base that says we use local low-priv accounts first. If that's not enough, then we need to step it up to maybe a local high-priv accounts. If that's not enough, you need to have more more domain reach. Then we need to step it up to domain-based low-priv accounts. If that's not enough, that's only when you need to consider high-priv domain accounts. This is for service accounts. If you, for any reason, needs to have a service account, like I'm running a web application, that web application needs to communicate with a database, with other services behind the scenes. I need to give it admin access, or domain account access to those services as a single sign-on methodology. I can start working with either managed service accounts, and that would be the thing I will point you at. That's that direction you have to investigate into. So the thing with the managed service accounts, there is no statically configured password with the managed service accounts. There is a password. That password is managed by your computer, the computer the service account is enabled on or installed on. So nobody has to manage that password. That password, as a matter of fact, is changed periodically, right? Is it the same policy as the computer password change policy? It's the same as
the computer, yes.
Yeah. So just make sure, use local services, which is low priv, regular user on the machine, no password there. Network services, low priv with network access. Local system, obviously, admin privs still on that system. Or the new service-specific accounts. A service can have a service-specific account. This is a flavor of the local service account. More specific in SIDs, et cetera, for that service. Otherwise, managed service account should be your main target if you want to step up into domain, using domain accounts. And your final last resort type of last selection is a regular user account in the domain, no matter privs. Because when you step up to that level, then we're starting to speak about static passwords. Those accounts will never change their passwords. Nobody will want to change that password. It's working, never touch, let's keep it that way, right? The managed service account has been around since
2008 or 2.
Yeah, so it's nothing new. Most of you guys should have heard about this before. So this is the story about local accounts. So in terms of, just to give you some pointers and what you should consider in terms of auditing, of course, all sorts of account management. Somebody created an account, somebody changed the password, etc. Policy changes should be audited as well regarding how often we keep the passwords, if there are any requirements for password changes, and any policy at all, password qualities, password policies, etc. This should be audited as well. If something is using the virtual account concept, like PowerShell, for instance, we should bother about monitoring what's going on in PowerShell. Otherwise, we will lose those threads. There is no connection between that virtual account did something, performed some actions in the environment, and the actual user account behind who performed the logon, the initial logon. This is a very important piece to tie these two things together. So we need to start looking into these things. And there are probably plenty of other places too. I mean, auditing Active Directory as general, this applies to Active Directory as well for account management, policy changes, etc. So just to give you some indicators and pointers. Next in line, if you keep going and looking at what type of protections or what type of obstacles we can put in front of those attackers, we can start speaking about two sets of protections the Windows platform can offer. The first one is called additional LSA protections. This is all about giving the LSA process, the LSASS.exe process, which is the highest security authority in the Windows platform, a specific protection against memory tampering. So when we run something as a protected process light in the Windows environment, the process will have access to its own memory, obviously. Otherwise, kernel side will have access to that process memory. So no other process, unless they are running as part of the kernel, will have access to that memory, which is a very nice protection. Tools like Mimikatz, Windows Credential Editor, gsecdump, etc., all of these tools that harvest credentials, they rely on the fact that they can read the LSASS process memory. And they can probably read it with not very much restrictions. When we push that to run as a run process light in Windows, they will have trouble getting hold of that memory. It's not impossible. If you manage to run the device driver at kernel level, then you will have full access to that memory still. So this is something good to have. You will just take away all the classic tools out of your site. The accidental somebody double-clicked something will probably disappear. You need to have admin privs. You need to install that device driver. So if you have proper monitoring, you should be able to see that device driver installation going on. So that gives more traceability, more noise to those activities. We're not saying this is 100% bulletproof. This is a good obstacle to put in place. Another things that comes with this is that the caching effects will be treated differently. So as I cannot just use the classic tools to harvest credentials, the caching effects will be handled the same way. Together with that release, we're speaking about the Windows Server 2012, right?
Yeah.
This, by the way, this was backported to Windows 2008 R2 and Windows 7, parts of it, not everything. So there is a more strict policy on what the Windows machine should be caching in terms of credential artifacts or live credentials. So that's another benefit of that one. We got that.
Yes,
so
we
you can see
show all the different use if you use Mimikatz on a machine that isn't protected at all, and we dump the LSAS.
So then we have implicit access to the memory if we're running as admins, obviously.
And if we jump to a machine that has protected process, we try to use Mimikatz, we get an error.
Yeah. As said, this is if I run as a regular admin. I'm not going through the kernel device driver model to access this memory. If you try to use other like memory dumping tools, they will face the same type of obstacle in here. So this is a good thing to implement. There are some, please be careful, of course, because everything plugging into LSA does offer a plugin interface. So all the plugins, every component you add to LSA in terms of a plugin has now to be properly signed according to the rules of signing kernel device drivers. That's a very nice thing, actually. So you will have a very secure plugin interface for LSA just by implementing this. And you will be sorting out all these plugins that might have been looking into what's going on within your LSA process without the need to dump its memory because they are plugins. So that's something that will be definitely visible in the system. Yeah. Good.
And last, we have the output of credential guard.
Yeah. That's the other protection we can offer our systems, is that we enable the credential guard subsystem on the machines. So just to give you the overall idea about the credential guard, what that is, we'll look at this part of the slide. You see that there are two compartments. The one that is called the high-level operating system compartment we're working with. This is where my user experience is. I'm running my applications, my tools, etc. I'm performing the logon. I have all the peripherals connected. And then there is the other compartment, which is called the virtualization-based security compartment. This is where the sensitive parts in my operating system will live. That's the original LSA process will be kept in that compartment, with all the memory it has, with all the credential artifacts that it's caching and it's hosting. So to get hold of that part of the memory, then it's not enough anymore to install the kernel device driver, because that one is going in here. So you need to bypass the hypervisor beneath to be able to access that other compartment. You need to hack your way around in the machine and bypassing the hypervisor as such, acting as part of it, and that's a different story. Microsoft are putting a lot of efforts and a lot of investments in securing the hypervisor such way. They do have a very nice bounty program, so if you happen to find a security issue with the hypervisor, they will pay you well. There are a lot of prestige in this. So this is isolating. This is not just protecting the memory. This is just like if we are running two virtual machines on the same hypervisor. Okay? So because you're admin on one of the virtual machines doesn't give you access to the other one unless you own the hypervisor and can bypass the hypervisor altogether. If you have physical access to the machine, that's one possibility to read that memory. Or if you can disable this altogether, that's another possibility to access that memory. As long as this is enabled and running, you won't be able to access that memory unless you can plug into the Hyper-V components. And these are starting without loading any other device driver. This is a very early stage at that process of starting up that machine. So that's a big challenge for attackers. So what happens if somebody disables this? Easy. The system will waste all cached credentials, both permanently cached and temporarily cached. So if you disable this, restart the machine, it will start prompting for every single access you have. No saved credentials at all, no caching, no nothing. So that's a built-in protection it has. So if somebody tampers with the function, disable or change the policy or settings related to that, it will actually clean up your credentials in your profiles and sessions. So there are obviously supported scenarios, not supported scenarios. These are maybe the most interesting one. What is not supported when running or not protected when running credential guard. So basically, we're saying Kerberos or NTLM v2 as supported protocols, and we are not protecting credentials if there is anything prompting you for a credential, not running a single sign-on. That something is not, most probably not going to be protected by credential guard. So digest authentication, credential delegations, MS-CHAP v2, just some examples of things that are not going to be protected by credential guard. Do we have some? We just had that before, right?
Yeah.
Great. And as you could saw, if you just switch back to that machine, if that's possible.
Let's see if I still have.
So instead of getting the credential information we were looking for, we got references to those credentials. Okay.
I already had it.
So as you see there, there is an LSA isolation key with some encrypted chunk of information. These are references to the real LSA process running in that isolated environment or container. So there are given APIs going on the network level between these containers. This is nothing going through the hypervisor. This is on the network level between these containers. And we can tell the isolated LSA process, hey, can you please authenticate towards that service? I want to have a ticket granting service ticket to access the internet. Can you please get that for me? And it will perform that and hand over the tickets to me. A thing I will never be able to do is extracting things like the TGT or getting the actual credential artifacts. These will be out of reach. But a TGS is in my hand because I simply need the TGS to be able to access the service. So that's something we cannot protect by design. You can never protect against TGS actions that steals the TGS or reuse the TGS for other purposes. And this is protecting both local accounts and domain accounts today. Okay? So obviously, we need to make sure that these things are running. First and foremost is Secure Boot is there. Secure Boot is the basic enabler for that, both the LSA protections and actually the credential guard, which is part of the device guard. Unless Secure Boot is there, these functions will never be sticky. So you can just go ahead and disable and enable flipping a registry key. With Secure Boot, you have to have physical access to the machine to be able to disable or tamper with these policies, because it will throw up a consent prompt at the time of the machine startup. Then you have to have the physical access to be able to disable any of this. There are some interesting event IDs for the credential guard and the LSA protection to look at, these WinInit event IDs of interest. We're having them in the slide deck, so you guys will have access to that, obviously. Just to be able to build the case of monitoring and figuring out, is everything running according to the rules, the setup we just did. Good. Stepping a bit away from the local, protecting the local identities and protecting what's going on locally in the machine, looking at how do we manage our systems remotely. Obviously, I guess most of the guys, without asking the question, will be raising their hands for the RDP option. Right? More or less. This is the way we've been doing it. This is the way probably we're going to be doing for some years ahead. Some of you guys are doing a bit better, I would say, when using the remote admin tools. This is classic network logon type 3. This is single sign-on, hopefully. I'm not giving away my credentials. I'm using my credential artifacts to perform a single sign-on to that system. I'm having my access to the system. And then somewhere in the future, maybe partial remoting for most of us. That's where Microsoft wants us to be. Okay. There are some obstacles with the partial remoting model, obviously. So it's a new way. Tools are different, etc. We don't have that much of the clicking ongoing. So let's look, what can we do with this, the most used method to remotely manage our servers? Well, here we offer, or the platform offers, two different functions to strengthen the security model, make it more difficult for attackers to extract credentials and play with them. First is the restricted admin mode. This is something I tell my RDP client and the receiving service on the other side, I want to run this RDP session in so-called restricted admin mode, which is, simply speaking, I'm performing a single sign-on, no explicit prompting for credentials. Once I'm in the session, I do have that identity I started with, but within the session, there is no single sign-on with that user identity towards other systems. So the trick is you have to be local admin on that destination system, and you will borrow the local machine credentials and attach them to your session for anything outgoing from that machine towards other things. So this is a very nice, very perfect protection when it comes to I'm managing my final destination. This is not to be used on jump hosts, jump servers, tool servers, whatever you call them. This is very suitable for managing the final destination. You're not exposing your actual credentials over there. Just to showcase that for you.
Yes. So we have a client where we start the RDP, and we choose to start it with restricted admin.
So this is if we're doing it manually. Obviously, we have.
There are group policies that you can have this as default. And you see here your Windows logon credentials will be used to connect.
There has been a lot of talks when Microsoft introduced this in the platform. A whole lot of hacker groups went like, whoa, thank you, Microsoft, for enabling pass the hash for RDP. That's basically the backside of that coin. Because it's single sign-on, that's pass the hash for RDP, which is maybe a bad thing, but the benefits of this might very well be much, much more than that negative aspect. So, as you see, no explicit prompting for credentials. It's going towards securing the session, and I'm basically led into that session. So if we start looking at the credentials within.
Yeah. So if we do a simple K-list, we will see that the client that normally is the username now is the server name.
So that's a substitution of my identity. Normally, you will find your user ID there. Your tickets are there. I don't have any of that. I have only the machine tickets. This is the machine TGT. This is machine TGSs altogether. If you do the same, things with the Mimikatz, you will clearly see that the session running as that user has a set of credentials not related to the user. That's the Tony user, right?
Yeah, that's the Tony user. And if you look at the username and the credentials, it's the local machines.
So once again, an attacker having control over this machine will not get anything in addition because of this session. They will still be kept isolated within that machine. So I'm not giving any means of lateral movements or ability to proceed to other systems from here. Okay. Switching back.
Yeah, gonna sign out.
Yeah.
And we're gonna do this.
Thank you. So the other component, which acts pretty similar to the first one, is called the remote credential guard. Now, this is very similar to the credential guard we had discussed before. So the only, basically what you can do is, let me just go back here, clean up this a little bit. So take that supervisor down here. To make this remote credential guard, replace it with the RDP protocol. And this container is your RDS. This is your remote desktop service, and this is your RDC. This is your client. So your credentials will never leave the client you initiated the remote desktop connection from. Whenever you need something, an authentication or something to be done, carried out for you, the client will do that and forward whatever you need within the session to the server side. So you're logged in as the user you have full fluent single sign-on towards other system with your local identity you just used to establish the session. So we don't have any of the artifacts with the restricted admin mode. In addition to that, this works with non-admin users. Restricted admin modes require admin privs because of the impersonation of the system. This doesn't require admin privs. So you can run as a regular user and protect regular user identities with this one. Another very nice artifact with this is that whenever you disconnect your RDP session, the channel back to where the credentials are will be obviously non-existent anymore. So if anybody just took over your processes in that session, if they want to use those processes to access services or anything like that, they won't be able to authenticate because the original information for authentication is not reachable. So there will be processes still running as that identity on that destination RDS server. But if anybody wants to use them at that time, they will have access denied because there are no credentials bound to them. Once I reconnect, the credentials will be there again. So this limits the time frame, that window in time, the attacker needs to perform their activities on the system. Once again, putting another obstacle in their path. They have to sit and wait until I get back to the system and establish that connection to the original credentials to be able to get away with that activity. You have that on? So the difference is that actually you use a different switch, right?
Yeah.
Or configure
Remote
the policy
guard.
differently?
Yeah. So now we're using remote credential guard instead.
And to use remote credential guard, you don't need to have credential guard enabled on the destination system. This can be run without credential guard per se being enabled on the system.
Yeah, and the main difference if we use klist, we will see KDC called. It's empty. It's normally the authenticated domain controller.
Mm-hmm.
But now, when it's delegated from the client,
Yeah.
this is just a shadow ticket.
So you don't have the actual TGT available in the system.
No.
On this case. So this is, if you try to dump things with Mimikatz, it will be exactly the same result as with Credential Guard, as if Credential Guard was enabled locally on the system.
Yeah.
Cool. Another thing we can do, there are some small requirements for this, obviously. This is Windows Server 2016 or Windows 10 and above in operating system level. So we're bound to that. For the restricted admin mode, we can use this with Windows 7, Windows 2008, R2, and above. So this is basically all supported releases of the Windows platform today are supporting the restricted admin mode. Okay. So that's the particular case about the RDP. We're going to get back to this, the PowerShell remoting stuff, on the next session, but there is a relationship, identity-wise relationship. But let's postpone that to the next session. In terms of looking for auditing trails or information about what's going on, restricted admin mode can be cited if you look at the logon events for the RDP sessions. That's logon type 10, stands for RDP, and there is an indication whether restricted admin mode was used or not. For the remote credential guard, there is no specific way to tell it was remote credential guard. So this is something I have to be sure I configure on my starting point. This is my RDP client that has to be configured properly. I connect to systems. I do single sign-on. If there is any explicit prompt, I should stop right there. Do not proceed. So this is how we can see different things. In terms of the PowerShell remoting, if there is any virtual account created, this is stated clearly in the logon type 5 of the same type of event logs. So I can see and trace those type of events as well. Good. Next thing. Everybody speaks today about multi-factor authentication, right? I mean, especially Microsoft, they obviously want to sell a whole lot of licenses for their Azure MFA. If you, as a matter of fact, have Office 365, you have access to Azure MFA, which is a good thing. But if we start looking for protecting enterprise identities on premises, we have two options for multi-factor authentication that are supported by Active Directory, natively supported by Active Directory. One of them is SmartCard. And the other one is a flavor of SmartCard, which we call Windows Hello for Business. So basically, it's SmartCard logon, but with a twist. Instead of a PIN code, classic PIN code for your SmartCard, when you use Windows Hello for Business, you will substitute that PIN code for that physical device we call SmartCard with a PIN code, maybe on your hardware, on your laptop, or a fingerprint, or a face recognition, or a companion device, whatever method that is supported by the Windows Hello subsystem. Right? But if you look at it in the background, it's actually a SmartCard logon. It's a key-based authentication with or without certificate. So at the far end, it's the same thing as a SmartCard logon. This is what Active Directory supports natively. To add to this, we got virtual smart card was introduced in the platform in the release of Windows 8, Windows Server 2012, right? Yep. So that's maybe an easier way to start using smart cards, to just implement a virtual smart card, which is a TPM-based smart card living in this hardware. So once again, this is a very good opportunity to force my admin users, those with high privs, to use a very specific machine and not to expose those admin privs everywhere else in the system. Your admin privs lives in a virtual smart card on this particular host. You cannot step up to anything else and start performing a logon. We're starting implementing this type of silo thinking here. You're bound to a specific machine to start your activities from. So will the attacker be as well. If I'm bound to that, the attacker should be bound to the same thing. Now, one thing that we can do to enhance this, as said, smart card logon per se is not a protection against pass the hash or pass the tickets, etc. But there is one thing that can be used to enhance the situation a little bit, at least when looking at the pass the hash, which is called authentication mechanism assurance. This is the ability to dynamically bind security groups in Active Directory to attributes on your certificate in your smart card. So just to showcase that for you, let me see if we have everything up and running. Yes. So this is configured, and we do have a set of policies in Active Directory. This is so-called issuance policies, as we define them on the certificate templates. And in this particular case, there is a policy called high assurance, which is mapped to a security group. There is a linkage between that one and the security group, as stated here. So if anybody performs a smart card logon with a certificate with that policy, that somebody will have that group as appearing in his security token. So if I assign the privileges to that group, then it doesn't matter if you got my anti-hash, because that is not a smart card logon. That will not give you the group and the security token. So in this case, we're logged on with that smart card.
The smart card, yes.
Yeah. And then we see that the group is appearing in. So let's perform the smart card logon. If we go back and look at the attacker's runbook, their playground, that security group in Active Directory is not allowed to have any static members. It's actually, as a matter of fact, never have any members at all at any time. No matter when you look at it, it will always be empty. And nobody can add any members to it because Active Directory refused adding members to it as a protection. So you got that one. If you can go and look at that group, please. And there are no members. We just logged in. We're logged in that one, right?
Yep. Yeah. And we can't add any users as well.
So this is a special purpose group mapped to a policy. You're not allowed to add static members to it. Once again, this is another obstacle we are adding. Another thing. Whoever looks at this, okay, this is the privileged security group I have to be part of. This is the way to manage those servers. Nobody's member of that. Where to go? How to find those users? There will never be any information about who the users are. Once again, we are moving another part of the runbooks the attackers used to use to figure out what's going on in this environment and build themselves the ability to get hold of the most interesting things here. There are some recommendations. If you're into smart cards, please look at these guys. Strict KDC validation, PK init freshness, which is a very nice thing to configure if you, there is an ugly, it's not a bug, it's actually per definition, it's part of the Kerberos protocol. before the PK init freshness, it's possible to pre-calculate challenge responses for smart card logon and then play them later on. You have just to pre-calculate them with the right timestamps. Okay, starting with Windows 10, Windows Server 2016, this is fixed. You have to enable the fix, enabling the policy. Another thing that is very interesting is that for those who configure their user accounts to only use smart card logon, we had to put those accounts on password never expire, static password. Okay, this is fixed now in 2016. So those accounts will follow your password policy and will change their passwords on that time interval defined in the policy and according to the policy requirements in terms of length and complexity. Very nice thing. So please look at these recommendations. Other things that Active Directory offers in terms of protecting our identities, making it even harder or putting more obstacles, is the protected users group in Active Directory. So if we look, this is a built-in group in Active Directory since 2012 R2. If you put anybody as part of that group, they will have a Kerberos-only logon experience. NTLM is not allowed anymore. Delegation is not allowed anymore for that account. Weak encryption protocols or mechanisms are not allowed anymore for that account in Active Directory. So this is stepping up the security model with all different means for those accounts. I guess Fabio and the other guys can tell you a lot of stories about collecting domain admin privs because somebody was using the domain admin on a web email service or something like that. If they were part of the protected users, they will never be able to use that because that's normally require delegated credentials, which are not supported anymore. So that's an easy thing to do. Additional things that we will get is that we will not be caching the empty hashes. We will not be caching any credential artifacts for those users belonging to the protected users groups. So it's simple, a matter of fact, just adding somebody as member and then going ahead and logging in to the system. So if you just please. So that's a user belonging to a protected user group?
Yeah, maybe we can check.
Where am I? Yep. And we start collecting credentials for that, or in that session. We don't have the anti-hash, but we will still have full-blown pass the ticket situation or scenario here, of course. So, as said, we cannot protect against everything. As far as we must have a single sign-on experience, we still have the other. Maybe you just connect it to running session or something. We tried to. So if you look at that, and I will look at the other things. Okay, meanwhile. Other things that happen in Active Directory is that we have something called conditional based access, or actually this was released with the name dynamic access control. This is the opportunity or idea about having something called compound authentication. We start not just looking at who the user trying to access this resource is, but a combination of user and device information. So if you try to access a file on a file share or an application, the application will have information about you as a user and your device as well. So there is a combined Kerberos ticket that includes user information and device information. And not just only security groups and SIDs in the Windows platform. This extends to include other attributes in Active Directory if I want to. This is the so-called claims being added to the system. So I can just pick any attribute in Active Directory and include that in the Kerberos ticket towards any application. So this way I need to give less access from applications to Active Directory. They will still have access to the pieces of information they need and require for their operations, and I don't need to have that much access enabled across the whole platform to different attributes in Active Directory. Another thing that is very welcome is this. We got it back. This was available in the system back in the days. Microsoft decided to remove it for some strange reason. They add it back now. So I can use IP addresses as service principal names, which is very good because then it's enabling Kerberos single sign-on. If I go to services based on their IP addresses, I don't necessarily need to be going with their DNS names. Once again, trying to make this harder for the attackers in terms of I won't use NTLM-based authentications. I want to use single sign-on based on Kerberos. Only TGSs will be flying around in the network, which is much, much more secure than having NTLM authentications going on forth and back. So removing that critical part from the system. We got that running?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's the user member of the protected users group.
Mm-hmm. As you see there in the MSV provider, there is no cached anti-hash for that user. Cool. We still have things to go. So starting with Windows Server 2012 R2, we have something new added to Active Directory. This is the first time ever Active Directory actually bothers about being an authorization server or service. Before that, Active Directory only bothered about authentication. Okay, tell me your username, password. Here is your ticket. Here are your keys. Use them wherever you want. I don't bother. Starting with 2012 R2, we can configure Active Directory to be critical about where do you want to use your key. You have to tell, you have to fulfill the requirements, you have to follow the policy. Unless that, you will not get any keys. Even though you know the admin logon or the user logon, if you're not performing it within that policy defined, within that silo defined, you will not be able to get your Kerberos tickets. Active Directory will refuse giving you back the tickets. This is Windows. This is Active Directory authentication policies and silos. It relies heavily on the Kerberos fast armoring, the compound authentication platform that was released in the 2012 release. And let's just demo that so you guys see the effects of it.
Yeah, we can start.
So let's imagine somebody got hold of the domain admin logon and password. Unless they use a very specific machine, that logon is not useful anywhere in the system.
So here we have defined where the Tony user is allowed to log in. It's the domain controllers and the device 01. And as I demoed through this session, we have used the device 01 many times for the Tony user. But if we try to use another.
So stepping up to a different system and trying to perform a logon. And it doesn't matter if it is a console or remote desktop or accessing. If you're establishing a session there and now.
Can change user?
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
There.
So it basically says, okay, well, you might have the password, but no, you're not allowed to perform a logon on this. And this is not a local policy. This is a policy by Active Directory. So it doesn't matter what computer you step up to. You're not getting any Kerberos tickets for that. And the final thing, I know we're running a bit over time, and the final thing is the just-in-time access. That this is now Active Directory 2016 operational level. This is time-based group membership. That's the part that is supported together with Shadow Principal. So if we get a quick demo of that one. So basically, you want to be managing some system. We give you that ability for a limited time. Active Directory will give you a membership in a security group, and that will be removed automatically and clean up. And everything else, all the ecosystem of Kerberos and Active Directory will honor that setting. So the shortest TTL value will govern your lifetime of the Kerberos tickets.
So first I have to define the time span, and I just say 5 minutes now. It's not recommended because it interferes with the Kerberos queue time, which is 5 minutes, so it will need to be longer.
And then giving somebody membership in a group.
Yeah, and I will add the Tony to the domain admins group here and set the member time to live value to 5 minutes. And then if I use get other group members, I will see the Tony user as a member, and it also has a timestamp at TTL value, which counts down.
So this is an absolute lifetime. This is when you set it, it will start counting down. And when it reaches null, that membership will be terminated.
And the Kerberos tickets will be renewed, and he's not a member of that group anymore.
Yeah. Once again, disturbing the attackers, putting obstacles in their path. They think they can figure out who the admins are. They just see a momentarily picture about, okay, right now, Daniel is an admin over this domain, but we don't know. It's just for 5 minutes. They have to keep going there, monitoring, revealing themselves even more, making themselves even more noisier, and then we will hopefully be able to catch their operations. Good. We have some other goodies in here, so we keep that for you to look at the slides. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, just let us know.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.